Thanks so much, George. Thanks for inviting me. Also, Vipka, who was involved in inviting me, and thanks to everyone around the world who's attending today. I see some friends. Hi, Hilda. So I'm honored to be here. And I'd like to begin by leading a core meditation of the Mindful Self-Compassion Program, Affectionate Breathing. So this meditation, if you're not familiar with it already, adds a couple of twists to breath meditation, that twists that help us to warm up our awareness. So that's kind of the first step towards self-compassion, is warming up our awareness. So if you would like to warm up your awareness, let's do that together. So please find a comfortable position. Allowing yourself to feel fully supported by your chair, maybe even by the floor or cushion underneath you. And allowing your eyes to close partially or fully. And just taking a moment to rest in your awareness, whatever presents itself to you. Could be external sounds, internal sensations. Just taking a moment to rest in awareness. And then beginning to notice the physical sensation of breathing in your body. However it's most accessible to you. And in particular, noticing how the in-breath nourishes your body, energizes your body. And how the out-breath relaxes your body and soothes your body. And now bringing your attention to the rhythm of your breathing. The way it flows in and out. Like the waves of an ocean. And if it feels right, even giving yourself permission to savor, to appreciate, or even to enjoy that rhythmic motion. even if you wish, allowing your body to subtly or gently sway back and forth with the rhythm of your breath. Allowing your body to gently breathe and move along with the rhythm of your breathing. And of course, the mind will wander, as it usually does, over and over, which is the nature of the mind. No problem. Just like a puppy or a little child wandering about, that's what it does. So when you notice that, then just once again, just feeling the rhythm of your breathing, giving yourself permission to rest in the rhythm of your breathing. And if it makes sense to you, even allowing yourself to be internally rocked and caressed by this internal rhythm, back and forth. Allowing yourself to be internally caressed by this rhythm. And if you notice, there's a sense of watching your breath. See if you can let go and just be with your breath, feeling it. Even letting go of the idea of meditating, just allowing yourself to feel the rhythm. A simple physical sensation. And if you wish, and only if you wish, if it feels just right to you, letting go even further and just allowing yourself to be your breathing. Just allowing yourself to be simple rhythm. Just being, breathing. Permission to just be breathing. Just breathing. Breathing. Permission to let go of everything we know, everything else we're feeling, even letting go of the idea of meditating, simply feeling the rhythm of breathing, the internal caress. Permission to be caressed. Permission to be breathing. Just breathing. And the mind wanders. Gentle rhythm. Taking refuge in the rhythm of our breath. Permission for this one precious moment to just be breathing. Breathing. And now beginning to release the practice. Knowing that this gentle rhythm is there whenever you need it. And expanding the circle of awareness to all the sensations in your body. To all the emotions in your heart. To all the thoughts in your mind. To all the sounds happening around you. The sensation of sitting on a cushion or chair. And allowing your experience to be just as it is, in its totality. And if you wish, if only for this one precious moment, if only for this one moment, allowing yourself to be just as you are. Just like this. And then when it feels just right for you, you can very slowly and gently open your eyes. Take in all these beautiful people who are gathered here from around the world to bring something good into this life. Who are committed to transformation, starting with ourselves. So what a privilege this is. Spend our time in this way. So, so now transitioning a little bit from the body and the heart, a little bit into the head. For a little talk, but we don't have to leave our bodies and our hearts too much. Perhaps even if we listen with our hearts, and if I manage to speak from my heart, maybe it's better that way. But in the next half hour, what I'd like to do is a few things. I'd like to describe what we mean by self-compassion. I'd like to put it in the context of Buddhist psychology. I'd like to very briefly summarize the research on self-compassion because it does give us some sense of confidence to practice. And I would like to also identify two underlying processes. They're actually kind of secrets because they're very underlying, that are important to know in order for self-compassion to be beneficial in your life. And then lastly, I would like to offer a simple guideline for bringing self-compassion seamlessly into our lives and into our meditation practices. So that's a whole lot. We'll see how far we get. But first, I'd like to just say very briefly how I got interested in self-compassion. Many of you have heard this. If you have, please bear with me. I'm going to also say it very briefly. But I first learned mindfulness meditation in 1977 when I was 25 years old in a hermitage in Sri Lanka. And then after that, I went to graduate school in clinical psychology and graduated with a specialization in anxiety disorders in 1984. And then for the next 20 years, basically, I suffered from an anxiety disorder, which nothing I knew could touch. And also, I was meditating. I was practicing mindfulness throughout this whole time. It didn't touch it either. That is to say, I was practicing awareness practice and attention practice, not loving kindness practice. So anyhow, this was public speaking anxiety, and it was really debilitating. You know, once I was talking to a group of about 75 therapists, and I got up to speak, and nothing came out of my mouth until someone yelled from the back of the room, "Take a breath." And then in 2006, there was a big conference happening at Harvard Medical School, and I was just exasperated. And so I went on a meditation retreat 4 months before this conference, and the teacher basically said, why don't you practice more loving kindness, And this whole time, 20 years, I basically wasn't interested. I like awareness practice. So I did it. And every morning, may I be safe, may I be peaceful, as I thought about this horrifying conference. And then when the conference came and I stood up to speak, I had the usual terror, but there was a new voice in the back of my head that was saying to me, in spite of everything I was feeling, may you be safe, may you be peaceful. And then I looked out at the crowd and everybody was beautiful to me, which is rare when you have public speaking anxiety because the audience is the enemy, can criticize you. But I felt an enormous amount of love for the audience, and it changed everything. And basically, I haven't had much public speaking anxiety since. But I learned a few things. One is I learned it wasn't an anxiety disorder, it was a shame disorder, and I just didn't know it. But also, when I practiced loving kindness for myself or self-compassion, it actually treated the shame without me knowing I had a shame problem. And it also showed me that I had a shame problem. But mostly what I learned, and this was really key, especially because I'm a clinical psychologist, is that sometimes we have to hold ourselves in loving awareness before we can hold our experience. And this is especially the case in the grip of intense and disturbing emotions. And that's what got me interested in self-compassion, holding ourselves in addition to holding our experience. And then I met Kristen Neff in 2008. And as Georges described, the MSc program was born. We co-developed this thing. Now it's basically being co-developed by teachers all over the planet. So that's how I got into this. But anyhow, the question, what is self-compassion? So the easiest way, for those of you who aren't familiar with self-compassion, is just ask yourself, how would I treat a friend who's suffering in some way, maybe failed or feels inadequate or feels emotionally overwhelmed for some reason, maybe there's a loss in their life. How do you treat that person, right? So inevitably, you would probably be patient. You'd probably use kind words. Probably the tone of your words would be warm. You might touch the person in a kind way. And then the question is, when you suffer, when you're overwhelmed, when you feel inadequate, when you have failed, how do you treat yourself? How do we generally treat ourselves? And it's usually quite different, you know. Usually we're critical with ourselves. We kind of isolate ourselves in shame. We get wrapped up in our thoughts. We ruminate. The words we are saying to ourselves, they're, self-critical. We're not very nice to ourselves, usually. In fact, 78% of us, according to research, are basically more compassionate toward others than ourselves. And that has has consequences. So an informal definition of self-compassion is when we're suffering, treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding as we would treat a good friend. And Kristen Neff also created an operational definition for self-compassion, which is the foundation of her scale, the self-compassion scale. And basically, it's 3 components. One component is mindfulness versus over-identification or self-absorption. The second is a sense of common humanity versus isolation. This is really the most subtle part. Actually, she wanted to call it interbeing, because at the end of the day, we're really not separate individuals who are connected. We're just all co-arising, right? Interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh call it. And then the third is self-kindness versus self-criticism. So those 3 components, they work together into the unitary experience of self-compassion. Now, many mindfulness practitioners think that self-compassion and mindfulness are identical. Might say, oh, everything is in mindfulness, And this actually is probably true at an absolute level when we're suffering, as it is true that we're also probably fully mindful at an absolute level when we are self-compassionate. But at the relative level, which is the level most of us are at most of the time, particularly if we need to make choices about how we're going to practice, meditation, it's good to know some of the differences, So here they are, some. Mindfulness is loving awareness of moment-to-moment experience, like this thought, this feeling, this sensation. Am I aware of it? Am I aware of it in a kind and friendly, non-judgmental way? That's mindfulness, but self-compassion is a loving awareness of the experiencer. So like I said, sometimes we have to hold ourselves before we can hold our experience. So this is a different path, Mindfulness, more wisdom path. Self-compassion, more on the compassion path. Compassion is one sentient being in relationship to another, right? On the wisdom path, it's even scary to think about ourselves as sentient beings. But anyhow, as I'm going to show in a moment, the combination is really great. So mindfulness asks the question, what am I experiencing moment to moment? Compassion asks the question, this is the quintessential question. Okay, actually, when I said I'm going to give you one guideline for integrating self-compassion in your life, this is it. It's the question, what do I need? What do I need? Mindfulness, what am I experiencing? Self-compassion, what do I need? Another thing that's interesting is both mindfulness and self-compassion in literature are powerful ways of regulating, difficult emotions. But mindfulness does it by regulating attention and awareness, what we're paying attention to, how we do it, how we pay attention. Self-compassion regulates emotion through care and connection. And this is really how our emotions were regulated since birth, by others. But the good news is that we can tap this same, mechanism, this motivational system, this physiological system, to actually care for ourselves and regulate our own emotions. Both mindfulness and self-compassion actually reduce the tyranny of the separate self. Mindfulness dismantles the self, whereas self-compassion dissolves the self. So in mindfulness, we can break our self, which is based on our moments of experience. We can break ourself, so to speak, down into moments of experience, or into the 5 aggregates that are involved in the constant reconstruction of a self. In other words, sense experience, consciousness, pleasure and pain, the concepts and stories we tell to ourselves, and also our attitudes or emotions. Any of those aspects, when we pluck them out of this construction process, then the self starts to dismantle. And when the self, if the self is a car and all the parts of the car are on the floor of the mechanic's shop, where's the car, right? So that's how mindfulness dismantles the self. Whereas self-compassion, it kind of dissolves the self with warmth, or melts the self with warmth. And we all know what this is like, when we've been really suffering and someone loves us up, someone does all these things we were describing, kind tone and so forth. What happens is we get, after a while, we start physiologically to settle down. We become less self-focused, and we can begin to look around and actually see clearly, right? We can develop a little vipassana, and also perhaps even have some, the possibility of skillful action because we have a bigger view, right? So this is the way self-compassion also diminishes the tyranny of the self. But so mindfulness and self-compassion are complementary. Self creates warmth. Space creates warmth, and warmth creates space. And together, they're a powerful formula for regulating difficult emotions. But the term self-compassion makes people cringe, In the general public, self-compassion makes people think of selfishness, like, why do I want to do this? I'm going to become more narcissistic. And compassion is often related to weakness, But these are misconceptions, right? There are now over 5,000 articles in the academic literature on self-compassion. And across the board, self-compassion is related to well-being. It's increases in happiness and life satisfaction, coping, emotional resilience, emotional intelligence, decreases in anxiety, depression, stress, suicidality, improved physical health. But what's also interesting, apropos selfishness, is that people who are more self-compassionate, who grow in self-compassion, they actually grow in compassion for others. We see this quite consistently. They're also less jealous. They're also more likely to compromise in relationships. And some new research showed actually that people who are self-compassionate tend to have higher moral standards than others. In particular, they find selfishness less accessible, so they're not just saying, oh, it's all about me, who cares, right? So self-compassion is good for us. And it also increases motivation rather than decreases. That's a worry. When we motivate ourselves with kindness rather than with criticism, we're more motivated. And it is a powerful resource for emotional resilience. It is not weak. In research on post-traumatic stress disorder, we find that self-compassion predicts whether or not someone will get post-traumatic stress disorder more reliably than severity of trauma, which means this buffer, this resource of self-compassion it has a bigger impact on how trauma will affect our lives than the severity of trauma. That's the power of self-compassion. Now, this idea of self-compassion, it also kind of freaks out Buddhists, and for good reason. First of all, the term self-compassion is nowhere to be found in the Pali Canon, and in fact, it's a fairly new concept. Frankly, if you want to kind of talk about this without upsetting your friends, you could call it inner compassion. That usually just does the trick. But the first time intentionally bringing kindness to ourselves and compassion showed up in the literature 1,000 years after the Buddha, when Buddhaghosa wrote the Visuddhimagga and suggested that we start loving kindness meditation with compassion for ourselves. And he knew at the time that this was not part of the original words of the Buddha, but he went to great pains to show that this is probably an okay thing to do. And in particular, that the Buddha said that our kindness and compassion should flow in all directions, up, down, left, right, back, front, and so forth, which presumably would include inner and outer. So that's the argument of Buddhaghosa, and I would say the argument any of us can make. And the research is really supportive of this, So I wanted to talk also about the two underlying processes or kind of secrets of self-compassion that make all the difference as to whether self-compassion works. So those two secrets are, for those of you who are familiar with MSC, these are hardly, if you're teachers of MSC, these are not secrets. But for people who are just starting to practice, this is really good to know. And those 2 points are the phenomena of backdraft, and the second is what we call the core paradox of self-compassion. So I'd just like to mention those things. So when we practice self-compassion, sometimes we feel good, sometimes we feel bad, and sometimes we feel nothing at all. And when we feel good, we don't ask any questions. When we feel bad, we often beat up on ourselves thinking we're doing something wrong. And the same thing actually when we feel nothing. So the question is, why do we feel bad sometimes? This is really important to know, because at the end of the day, self-compassion is about goodwill training. It's not good feelings training. And how you feel doesn't necessarily mean it's not working. So there's a saying, love reveals everything unlike itself. Or when we give ourselves unconditional love, we discover the conditions under which we were not loved. If I say to myself, may I accept myself just as I am, inevitably, I'm going to start thinking about times I was not accepted as I am, or I'll think about the parts of myself that I consider unacceptable. And when we think like that, we don't feel so good, right? It stirs up the opposite. So the idea of backdraft is, the love goes in and the pain comes out. In a fire in a house, you open the door, the oxygen goes in and the flames come out. So this is a natural thing. It's actually a good thing. It's the process. Because when this old suffering comes out, we can actually hold ourselves as adults with kindness and compassion and mindful awareness and understanding, we actually transform early wounds and traumas. So we can actually, with self-compassion, reparent ourselves. This is extraordinary because we've built the muscle of self-compassion so that we have what it takes to give ourselves what we needed then and what we do need now. So this is backdraft. So when backdraft happens, please don't think you're doing something wrong. But what's really important is that we maintain a particular balance. And that is, when we're cultivating self-compassion, we want the energy or attitude of compassion to predominate. So when wounds come up, we should not start thinking, well, I should like dig all this stuff up and then meet it with self-compassion. No, start by meeting ourselves with compassion so that the compassion predominates, because we are cultivating compassion, right? So, and if you allow the wounds to predominate, then you're going to get overwhelmed. So requires a certain amount of skill, right? So if you notice you're getting overwhelmed with backdraft, please back off. Just don't do what you're doing, do less of it. And you can continue self-compassion by doing behavioral practice, like caring for yourself as you already do, maybe listening to music, gardening, something. You're still being self-compassionate, just in a wiser way. So that's one secret. The other secret is the central paradox of self-compassion, which is when we suffer, we practice not to feel better, but because we feel bad. There's actually another one. When we practice not to perfect ourselves, but rather to embrace our imperfections. So in both of these paradoxes, let's focus mostly on the first one. We practice not to feel better, but because we feel bad. What we're really doing is, questioning the striving aspect of this whole thing. Because often people look at self-compassion like a shiny new thing that they can kind of throw at their suffering to make it go away. And that's a trick, because that's actually a kind of a form of resistance. And what we resist persists. So actually, sometimes people can be undermining their self-compassion practice by being too zealous, right? So the way to think about it is like you have a child with the flu, and it's like a 5-day flu, and it's day 1 for your child, and you're just really nice to your child. Your child has the fever. You're kind to your child for what? To end the flu? No. You're kind to your child because what else are you going to do? You love the child and you want to comfort the child, right? So similarly, all of us have the flu, all of us are human beings, and suffering is a part of being human. But we do this crazy thing when we start to suffer. Not only do we beat up on ourselves, but we start to strive how we're going to fix everything related to this. And ultimately, we have skipped a step. We have skipped kindness to ourselves. So if we're kind of in a frenzy, we actually can't even think straight or see straight. We need to first love ourselves up when things go wrong. We have to be kind to ourselves when things go wrong. Very naturally, as a parent might to a child with the flu, okay? So lastly, can self-compassion be learned? Well, definitely. Actually, everyone can learn self-compassion. As long as we have breath in our body, we can learn self-compassion. And the research is kind of fun, actually. Not everybody is inclined to meditate. Some people, so how do you learn self-compassion if you don't meditate? Well, again, you could do behavioral things, like answering the question, how do I care for myself already? But the research shows, for example, that owning a dog, if you didn't have a dog as a pet and then you get one, you're probably going to increase in self-compassion. Another is forest bathing. In other words, if you take a walk in the woods and not, spend your time ruminating about stuff, but enjoy being in the woods, like focus on savoring the woods, the forest. It's going to increase your self-compassion. Or doing yoga, or going to psychotherapy. Effective psychotherapy consistently increases self-compassion, no matter what you're going for or what kind of therapy. And also, you can increase your self-compassion by being compassionate toward others. And you can take an MBSR class and increase your compassion. You can show up on Sangha Live. Probably, if we did a pre-post test on self-compassion before and after this hour and a half, no matter who's talking, you probably would actually find your self-compassion increasing. Mindfulness increases self-compassion. Compassion training increases self-compassion. Self-compassion training increases self-compassion. There's so many ways to learn self-compassion. So it's really personal. You want to kind of, so here's the deal. How do we integrate self-compassion seamlessly into our lives? So George mentioned the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. That's been translated into 17 different languages, and there's a whole lot of different suggestions. Ultimately, you should customize them for yourself. But in the UK, you also have a treasure, and that is Paul Gilbert and Compassion-Focused Therapy, lots of books and ways of cultivating self-compassion. But in a nutshell, as I mentioned before, the quintessential self-compassion question is, what do I need, particularly in this moment? What do I need now? And if we get in the habit of asking this question, we actually will cultivate the habit of self-compassion, because just asking the question, self-compassion is ultimately intention training. Just asking the question captures this fundamental intention to be kind to yourself. If you're talking with somebody else who's struggling and you ask, so what do you need? If I could give you something, or if you could get what you need, what is it? What do you need? It's a very compassionate question, and you can even get more specific, what does your heart need right now? Whatever language works. If a person is really emotionally upset, perhaps feels frightened, what do you need to feel safe? Or what do you need to soothe your body? What do you need to comfort yourself? What do you need to validate yourself? If you need to validate yourself, maybe you can journal, right? If you need to soothe your body, you can drink tea or take a warm bath. If you need to comfort yourself emotionally, maybe you can talk to a friend. If you need to feel safe, what is it? Some people just need to go into bed and pull the sheets over their head. That's not a crime, right? Might be not so great after 3 days, but what do you need to feel safe? It's better than beating up on yourself to kind of try to get safe. What do I need to protect myself? When people think that, self-compassion is something weak, they're actually missing half of self-compassion. No, they think self-compassion is all tender. They think compassion is all tender. Self-compassion and compassion also has a fierce aspect, as Kristen Neff is mostly teaching about now, because she wrote a book on this subject. Sometimes we need, what do you need? I need to protect myself. I need to say no. I need to make a boundary, right? This very important skill in life. Most of us think we don't have that permission. If you're going to be self-compassionate, you need that permission. What do I need to provide for myself? Which means, if I have a body, I'd like this body to, be healthy, to be a well, functioning, vehicle. How do I do that? Eating well, exercising, how do I provide for myself? And how do I motivate myself? Often in life, things are that the best thing to do for ourselves is we need to are difficult. So can we motivate ourselves with kindness? Like, you can do this, or, you've got this, you have what it takes, or even envisioning, a compassionate friend, or, connecting with your true self, I love you. I believe in you. I trust you. Imagine you had that voice in your head saying these things, especially when you're struggling, even in the midst of meditation, right? In the midst of meditation, some scary memories coming up, or you're starting to criticize yourself. Imagine there's a new voice, a new voice. May you be safe. May you be peaceful. May you be happy. I love you. I trust you. I believe in you. This is not self-deception. This is the truth of our experience. But everyone should find out for themselves. So that's all I want to say for now. What I'd love to do is to hear what you all think about this subject. Any thoughts that got kicked up, any questions, anything is fair game. This is open forum. Love to hear from anyone. No, don't have to be clever. So again, we probably can, if either in chat, leave a question. If you could moderate the chat questions, George, that would be great. And I will just respond to electronic hands, okay? Like Jeannie K has her hand up. Love to hear from you, Jeannie K.
I have a bad internet, so it has a bit of a delay. Maybe I should have done this in the chat. Can you hear me
Okay.
okay?
It's great to hear your voice. So please, if anybody's in a
Okay.
similar situation, do like Jeannie K did. We want to hear your voice. Thank you. What's up, Jeannie K?
Okay. So, what strategy do you use for backdraft? Like when we were doing our exercise, I've just had a very loss, and it started to all come up, all the shame and guilt and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So what strategy do you use?
So what did you do, Jeannie K?
Well, I just, I guess my mind just shifted, and I just tried to just calm down, and usually what I do is I just go into my breathing, just go back into breathing, and I'm not sure how I got, to where what I was feeling. It was while we were doing I can't remember. I just lost my husband just recently, a few days back.
Oh, gee. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Oh, a few
So I
days
can't
back.
remember exactly.
Yeah.
So I
Oh,
just don't remember where it happened, but while we were doing one of our exercise before you started teaching,
yeah.
it just kind of like overcame me.
Yeah. First of all, Jeannie K, you're getting a lot of love from this Sangha as we speak. And I just want to acknowledge your courage for speaking up 2 days after you lost your husband. This is huge, and it requires, I mean, clearly you have what it takes to heal, but it's going to take a little while. When I say you have what it takes to heal, you're a very courageous person, obviously, or you wouldn't be speaking right now. You're getting a ton of love, Jeannie K. You got to read the chat, okay? But what I just want to say that anytime we turn inward and open to our experience, we're going to see what's cooking, right? And especially if we open to our experience with kindness, all these different parts of us that have been kind of hiding start to feel some trust, and they come out, so. But what's happened to you is really fresh. And so you did the right thing, Jeannie. I mean, you've done 2 things already. One is you noticed what happened, and you and then you just kind of, took refuge in your breathing rather than getting overwhelmed. The other thing you did was right now you spoke up. That's pretty amazing. And you should know that when we're really cooking with some recent tragedy, we don't have to meditate, or we can meditate for 3 minutes. We can care for ourselves in really physical ways, like cleaning up the house, or drinking a cup of tea, nice and slow. This is called self-compassion practice. So mental training is usually good for reprocessing things. And again, we want to keep the love predominant over the distress and all the other tragedy in our life. We want it, but mental training is mostly for reprocessing, whereas for getting safe and getting grounded and getting anchored, which is the kind of thing that you may really need to focus on at this point, Jeannie K, is think more behaviorally, like just caring for yourself as if you had a friend who just lost her husband, for goodness sakes, what would you say to her? You might go for a walk with her. You might, whatever it takes. Just love yourself up. Just love yourself up. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry for your loss. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Jane.
Hi, Chris. Jane Miller. I'm a psychotherapist and I'm a lifelong meditator. I have two questions or two comments. One, first, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate all that you shared today. But the two things that are coming through my mind are, as a psychotherapist, I see a lot of trauma survivors, and very few of them know what they need. So I thought that was an interesting whole segment you gave about knowing your needs. Many people don't know their needs. And
Yes.
so the two things that I found striking were that many people don't know their needs and aren't really connected to their bodies to be able to ask what their body is telling them or what their experience inside their body. The other with trauma survivors is that meditation can be really challenging. To sit still when you're someone that has been sexually assaulted or sexually abused can be very difficult. And so there's so many other tools and techniques that can be so beneficial, that can be kind of, like you said, going into the forest, that finding other ways to feel safe and feel connected to the present moment. But I'm also curious about your thoughts about Gabor Mate, who I adore, who has his compassionate inquiry program. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that.
Oh, well, I just, he and I both just gave a talk through the organization, the Awake Network, individual talks.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got access to those talks, and I'm going to watch I'm going to watch his talk this afternoon here in the US. Maybe, I don't know where you are, but so the answer is I don't know enough, but perhaps you can share what you know a little bit so that other people on this call can get inspired or intrigued. What connections do you make? Do you see? Yeah.
I think what I really admire about him is he's very compassionate while also being very direct. And it's a beautiful meshing of helping someone feel safe and build that trust and that bond that they can go deeper than they might necessarily be able to do without that. And it's through that compassion that he's able to have the inquiries. And he trains psychotherapists to really understand how to do that with great. He's just really talented. I love his books. He's got tons of YouTubes. He's really made a huge impact on my clients' lives. So I hope that helps a little bit. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting as you're talking. There seem to be kind of two very therapeutic ways, or you might say aspects on a continuum for working with trauma. One is, the safety approach, which is know when you're feeling safe, know when you're feeling challenged, and know when you're feeling overwhelmed. And when you're overwhelmed, let's do what it takes to get safe. In other words, to ground and so forth. So that's one side. The other side is, yes, trauma happens. You've been traumatized. Here are some skills. We can do this. We can do this. In other words, to encourage a person through connection and through skills and through collaborative efforts to actually move forward rather than, bouncing back and forth with safety. So we need both, So it sounds like Gabor Mate is kind of in the you can do this aspect, In other words, I have enough experience in trauma. I, Gabor Mate, have enough experience in trauma that I know you can do this. It can be done. I have seen it. Let's do it. So there's something wonderful about that approach as well. when it comes to mindful self-compassion, since it's not a therapy and it's not relational beyond 8 weeks, or maybe, some online thing, we basically, in order to work compassionately with, at a very deep level, we really need to do it in community or with others. We need to be held, and we need counsel as we walk down those difficult paths. And therefore, in the MSc program, we're more on the continuum around working with the edge of safety and then returning to safety. In therapy, we can do a little more what Gabor Mate does,
Yeah, and I thank you very much. And I think that also relates to polyvagal theory, which is a whole nother aspect of helping people become more centered and grounded so that they can feel safe enough to enter into
Yes.
coping with the traumas. Yeah.
Yes. The physiological state of safety is not only necessary for working with trauma, but it's the foundation of working with self-compassion. I have a colleague, Ina Kazan, who actually is combining heart rate variability biofeedback with mindful self-compassion, so that the physiology of self-compassion is engaged when we start trying to work psychologically. It's a beautiful.
I do add one more aspect that I work with: somatic practices. Mm-hmm. Really integrating the body and keeping the body-mind connection. Really gaining insight. But I'm going to stop because Jim is waiting, and I thank you for your time. Greatly appreciate it. You have a lovely day. Take care.
Thanks for your question. Thanks for your work, Jane.
Chris, sorry, let me just, because there's a question here, and I would like to honor this. There's a person in the audience that would like to ask a question, but she prefers to be anonymous, and I would like to put the question to you.
Sure.
So the question is, I have been abused by my dad, but I can't recall it. It's hard to feel compassionate to me because the mind voice is loud and says it never happened. But my body knows.
Yeah.
So I don't live telling myself it's hard. Be gentle to yourself. Can you please guide me?
Yes. So we all have different aspects or parts to ourselves. And there's one part, the one that's asking this question, who knows that that this shouldn't, first of all, never have happened to her, that this was wrong. And there's another part of anyone who's been traumatized, but particularly this person for asking this question, that knows that healing is possible and knows that actually I do deserve kindness. I deserve it. Even though I was treated in a horrible way, I deserve it. So there's a part that knows this was wrong. There's a part that knows we deserve kindness. And there's a childhood part, probably, who has, because of the pain and the violation and the betrayal, feels, no, there's something wrong with me, or I wouldn't have been treated like this. I don't deserve kindness. So these are 3 different parts to ourselves, and there are inevitably more. So what's often helpful when we're starting to work with trauma is if we say, well, I don't deserve it, to really ask, what part of me thinks I don't deserve it? Because not all of us think we don't. There's a part of us that thinks we don't deserve it. And there's also a part of us who's just plain old wounded, And so we can begin, but I really recommend that this be done, if it's not already, under the guidance of, a skilled therapist. We can begin to bring kindness to those parts of us that feel undeserving. We can connect with the compassionate part of ourselves, and we all have one. We all, it's easy to love, pets and, trees and certain people. we all have a compassionate part. That compassionate part, we can bring the love and the compassion of that part of us to the wounded parts of us. But it's the kind of work that I would really strongly recommend not be done alone, especially in the beginning when things are just beginning to emerge. You know, in your case, the speaker, again, you've got a ton of courage, so that's enormously on your side. But in the beginning, it's good to work with somebody who knows the terrain, who's been down the path and can guide you safely. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Chris. There are other questions in the chat, but maybe you want to open up for someone, because I have two people also.
Okay, why don't we take one from Jim, one from chat, and then say, or however.
Yeah,
Did
great.
I say that okay? That's it?
Yeah.
Good. So Jim?
Yeah, hi, thank you. I really love this conversation. I'm a Vietnam veteran who deals with hearing voices, and the person who helped me the most, because everybody says, oh, talk to the voices, talk to the voices. Eleanor Longden,
Yes.
who says, the first thing is self-compassion.
Yes.
Before you have to even engage the self-talk, you know, from the autocratic parents.
Yes.
And that has been so important in my healing and trying to get into the Hearing Voices movement and get into the VA.
Fabulous, fabulous, Jim. And yeah, I have so much respect for Eleanor Longden, and she also just, you know, pulled away the blanket of shame that people have when they hear voices, and so many people hear voices when they've gone through severe trauma. And first of all, so to de-shame the voices, but then, as you said, Jim, to connect with that compassionate part of us. You know, some people believe in a true self that is compassionate. That's kind of fortunate. Many people don't, but we can then connect with a part of us compassionate. But the main thing is we want to flex the muscle of compassion, as Eleanor says. And then when we have that fire burning, then we have what it takes to talk to those parts of us and address the woundedness. Yeah.
And it was really hard for me because I did not grow up with any idea that I was entitled to self-compassion.
Yeah.
When they first suggested it, I thought, this is really wimpy.
Yeah.
And then I realized science told us.
Yeah.
It calms the nervous.
Yeah. It's not wimpy, you know. It's a powerful force. Self-compassion is a powerful force. It's the ability to say no, you know. And the other thing, Jim, is, you know, vis-a-vis the critical voices, you know, talk to the critical voices. The idea is, yeah, we want to talk to them from a place of compassion because the voices are just trying to, you know, often protect us in some way, not always, but often. But also we need to have that kind of fierce compassion in us, which is, you know what, thank you for protecting me like this, but I have to say, it's not helpful anymore. We got to do this a different way. You know, in other words, these voices in my head are ultimately not in the long run, you know, not helpful. I want to try something new, you know, and that new way is the path of compassion. Yeah. So we want to have a kind of sturdy compassion when we are standing in the midst of harsh and critical and voices. Does that make sense, Jim?
Oh, yes, very much so. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So, George, maybe.
Yes, the question from Eli. I want to learn to ask myself, what do I need? I really love that kind of question. It immediately gives me a warm feeling in my heart. But I also notice that asking this question needs a kind of inner belief that some of my needs can be met.
Yeah.
Due to trauma, I don't have that belief yet. What could be my first slow and safe steps in making space for that belief new to me? Also sending my love to Jeannie K.
Okay. Well, thanks to, what was the person's name? Who did they give their name? Yeah.
Eli.
Eli, thanks for
I'm
that.
saying, I hope I'm saying the name right. I think it's
Yeah. Thanks for that, Eli. Yeah, so I like your word yet. I can't ask myself that question regularly yet. But the person who asked the question to me actually has begun asking the question. So the train has already left the station, right? And the beautiful thing about this is that it's self-reinforcing, which means that when we ask ourselves this question and we get, practical, concrete about it, it opens up a whole world of delight and ease that really makes it's self-reinforcing. It makes us want to do it again. It's a good thing. We begin to see, actually, if I based my life from this day onward not so much on duty or serving others or reactivity, and I just asked my heart. I went deeper than all those conditions, and I asked my heart, what do you need? What do you need? And I started to listen, and then occasionally I started to do. It becomes a habit. It's a self-reinforcing habit. So your train, Eli, has already left the station, and I would just keep on chugging. Yeah. And just let me add one other thing. We never arrive, we will never be fully self-compassionate. And so when we notice we're not self-compassionate, or we can't ask the question, what do I need? That doesn't mean we failed. That doesn't mean it's all for naught. It just means, what life is a practice, and am I practicing in a way, moment to moment, that brings more ease and well-being, more freedom from suffering into my life and into the lives of others, Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. So
Thank
maybe
you.
now.
Yes, say.
Yes, that's me. Thank you very much for everything you've taught us today. So I have one question which I think is gonna make it clear to everyone how self-critical I am. My question is, how do you differentiate between needs and wants? Because the self-critical part of me is like, maybe the part who needs something, if that's an actual need, is like, oh, I need a break, I need the rest from all of this.
Yeah.
And the self-critical voice is like, no, you're just being lazy.
Yeah.
How do I know which one's right?
Very good question. Yeah. So it's a simple answer, and that is needs, wants are from the neck up, and needs are from the neck down. So one way to ask the question, what do I need, is actually to physically put a hand over your heart or on your belly or someplace below your neck. Feel your body and say, what do I need? And needs usually also refer to universal human needs. In other words, we need fundamental things like safety, love, connection, things like that. Wants are, way more idiosyncratic and transitory. Like, I may want a new car. Do I need a new car? Ask your emotional heart, or ask the part of yourself that's from the neck down, what do I need? And you will get a more soulful answer. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense, because I know it's very hard for me to notice what's going on neck down. I'm like, sitting here.
Yeah. It's good to spend a little more time in our lives taking the elevator down, This is why also in the meditation that we did, we were feeling the physicality of breathing. Otherwise, we start thinking about, oh, am I observing my breath? Am I being, concentrated? Am I doing this right? This is all neck up meditation. Neck down meditation is, can I feel my physical body moving? And when we meditate like that, the mind begins to quiet, And then when we do it in a way that we see something positive in the breath, in other words, we feel the physical sensation of rhythm, then we're actually drawn down into the body. And so if you practice like this, it actually becomes delightful to be in the body rather than a effort, We want to find something good in the body, and one thing that's good is this eternal rhythm of the breathing, Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. That's it.
So, Chris, there's another question in the chat from Nick Bloom. Simple question. How does forgiveness relate to self-compassion?
Great question. Okay. So most people think of self-forgiveness when they think of self-compassion. But actually, self-forgiveness is a very advanced practice within self-compassion. And it's a very advanced practice because it requires a lot more engagement of wisdom. So, just more parts of us have to be engaged in order to forgive, So anyhow, there's forgiving of others, which ultimately we do for ourselves, and there's forgiving of ourselves. And whether it's forgiveness of others or forgiveness of self, there are actually 5 general steps involved. And the first step is opening to the pain. Now, the tricky thing about forgiveness is readiness to forgive. And the reason why many people say, I'm going to forgive, is because they don't want to feel the pain of anger, but they're actually not ready to forgive. And some people say, well, I forgive you, but never speak to me again. That's not forgiving either. It's all bypass. To actually open to the pain is step number 1, and it makes all the difference. So if I hurt someone, I need to open to the pain of shame for having hurt them. If someone hurt me, I actually need to recollect how terrible that felt for me before I can do anything. So this is the mindfulness piece. It's like what happened and opening to it in the present moment. Step number 1. Step number 2 is self-compassion, which means loving ourselves up and being super kind to ourselves simply because the suffering has occurred. Either I did it or someone did it to me. But step number 3 is wisdom. And when the heart opens to the pain with mindfulness, and the heart opens because of the kindness in the room, so there's mindfulness and kindness in the room, then actually the mind begins to open to all the causes and conditions that led to this event. In other words, what was happening in that person's life to harm me, what was happening in my life that I caused harm to another person. And when we can see all the myriad causes and conditions, also forgiveness has a chance. That's step 3. The 4th step is the intention to forgive. And this is, forgiveness comes by the grace of God. It's not something you can force. You do the work and then either it happens or it doesn't. So what we can only do is we can form an intention to forgive. Like, may I begin to forgive myself for what I did wittingly or unwittingly to cause so-and-so pain. The intention to forgive. But this is different than forgiving. We can only intend. And then when forgiveness starts to happen, step 5 is the responsibility to repair and to protect. In other words, to make a commitment for this not to happen again to the best of our ability. And those 5 steps together are, as you can see, complex. It's not just about being kind to ourselves. Self-compassion is actually step 2 of these 5 steps. So we have to be very humble about forgiveness. It's a big job, and it requires a lot of wisdom. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
Chris, now, I don't have any more questions, but I have a few comments. I don't know if you want me to read them. This is one from Danielle. She says, I hear
Sure. Yeah.
I hear voices telling me to hurt myself and or end my life when I'm emotionally triggered. But when I started building a relationship and dialogue with the voices, it helped me so much. And now I see it was compassion that helped break
Yes.
down the intensity and pain. Thank you for highlighting this.
Yes, thank you. So, and thank you for that comment. And I guess one thing that's really worth saying in conclusion is that compassion is a resource that human beings have had since the dawn of humankind. This is nothing new. You know, we human beings have basically endured extraordinary hardship through compassion, and compassion is a positive emotion. Like a moment of compassion, it gives us energy, it gives us joy. It's a positive emotion, and compassion is part suffering and part love, but it's mostly love. It's mostly love. So anytime we suffer, if our first step is to wrap that suffering in love, when we hear voices telling us terrible things, and we wrap that suffering in love, and sometimes fierce love, right? Sometimes strong love, fierce love, it must yield. It must be transformed. It's just a question of skillful application, you know? But what we are all sitting on an enormous resource, the resource of compassion for transforming suffering. And what most people don't know is we can do this for ourselves. Most of us have not been taught this. Most of us have never had permission to do this, but the research is saying, please do this. And so that's the invitation.
Okay, so we're on top of the hour, but there's still another question. I don't know if you want to take it.
Well, I'm willing. People can leave as they need if they need to cut out.
If you please need to go, please go. So this question from Zineb. How can one identify their areas of shame or areas of shame, or find it in their body and subsequently work with it? I find it fairly intuitive to label and find most emotions somatically, but I find myself clueless, unequipped when it comes to working with or around shame. Thank you.
That would be probably the hugest question of the day. And some colleagues and I have created a graduate training for mindful self-compassion called Self-Compassion for Shame. And people can take this training if they want after they've taken the regular MSc program. But working with shame, you're working with the most difficult human emotion. And as this person said, it's hard to find shame especially it's hard to find it in the body because we dissociate when we feel shame. Shame is what's known as an emotion of denial. Basically, we go silent, we go small, we go away, and we also check out from ourselves. There's no one home to work with shame. It's super hard to work with shame. So how do we work with shame? So it's a kind of a graduated, a stepwise process. But the first is what this person has already done, which is to name it, name it and you tame it. And even if you can't find it physically in the body, you might be able to notice you're feeling shame by blushing or, feeling fear or hiding your face, or, everybody is capable of identifying shame somehow. So that's step one, that's mindfulness, And then step 2 is how to bring compassion to ourselves in the midst of shame. And that is a beautiful process. It's just a beautiful process. And it's such a subtle process. And, it's something people just need to experience, right? But the rewards are extraordinary because shame holds us back, keeps us from being fully human and frankly, fully alive in the world in so many invisible ways we don't even know. So when we learn to kind of see shame, bust shame and throw off the cloak of shame by exchanging it with self-compassion. Self-compassion is the opposite of shame. When we learn to do this, so many different areas in our lives actually get better. And the process of working with shame, the reason it's a graduate course from MSc is because it goes deeper. It goes deeper. When we name shame, which is often anchored in some of the earliest childhood experience, when we name shame, and then we go into shame with self-compassion, we are often bringing our conscious awareness to some of the deepest recesses of the human psyche. This is a profound process, which can only be done, in my view, in community and with the resource of compassion and self-compassion.
Well, thank you, Chris. I think we could stay here on and on. There's only a last comment as we hear. So from Corey, not a question, but a share. Someone described yesterday being told in regards to healing from trauma that you can't think your way out of something you felt your way into.
Oh, that's brilliant.
It really resonated and made me appreciate the importance of emotional practice. And I would add it just, this all practice you've been so wisely and passionately talking about. So I think we have no more questions. I would like to thank you, Chris, for this wonderful.
Thanks, George.
Thank you for being here. Thank you all. And just to end up in a spirit of community, maybe you would love to or like to unmute yourselves and say goodbye in whatever language you are. And yeah, see you around for a next session. And thank you for being here.